Call this meeting to order. Like ask Kayla to call the roll.
Thank you, Linda Diane. I will now call the roll for the Transportation Commission. Please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Boland.
Here.
Commissioner Felt.
Here.
Commissioner Fern. Commissioner Gordon.
Here.
Councilmember Griswold.
Here.
Commissioner Hull.
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman. Commissioner Parsons.
Here.
Commissioner Sims.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Sergeant Bill Clock.
Here.
Commissioner Dolan.
Here.
Commissioner Hess.
Here.
Commissioner Lazarus.
Here.
Commissioner Margolis. Commissioner Webb. We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. We have a consent agenda to approve the agenda and the minutes. I'll take a motion to approve that. Okay, seconded by Trudeau. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, then we have an agenda. And the first item on the agenda will be public comment, and so you have 3 minutes to speak. Kayla will keep the time. If there's anybody here that'd like to speak. Thanks.
Hi, good evening. Clark Chernetsky. My remarks tonight concern the proposal to amend Ann Arbor's crosswalk ordinance. That change would require pedestrians wishing to cross a street or roadway to place themselves at risk in order to have drivers yield to them at unsignalized crosswalks, including those with flashing yellow lights. I am a member of the Executive Committee of the Local Advisory Council of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority and represent the Area Agency on Aging. The Local Advisory Council advises the Board of Directors on matters concerning services for seniors and passengers with disabilities. We discussed the proposed changes in the crosswalk ordinance at our monthly meeting last week. We were not able to vote for a recommendation on this proposal because of concerns for separation of public bodies. However, during our discussion, no member of the council, that was about 10 or 12 people, thought that the proposed change was a good idea. They expressed fear over the requirement that they place their bodies or their wheelchairs into the roadway rather than at the curb or crosswalk ramp in order to have drivers yield to them. Some indicated that they would not try to cross streets if this change were made. In 2017, the City of Ann Arbor contracted with the O'Toole Design Group to provide an independent engineering review of Ann Arbor's crosswalk ordinance. The memorandum regarding this review, dated November 13, 2017, is in your meeting packet. Anna Pritchard, certified professional traffic operations engineer with 11 years of traffic engineering experience, summarized her organization's review. Given the disparity in size, and I'm quoting, given the disparity in size and inertia between pedestrians and motor vehicles, expecting the pedestrian to fully enter the roadway before drivers are required to yield would put pedestrians at unnecessary risk. By defining driver yielding requirements at crosswalks in a clear and explicit manner that allows pedestrians to safely make use of their right-of-way, Ann Arbor's crosswalk ordinance provides a reasonable contribution toward Ann Arbor's efforts to advance walkability and pedestrian safety. Ann Arbor has more pedestrians than most cities in Michigan, so it is reasonable to expect the city to fine-tune its traffic ordinances to meet its responsibilities. Those who are concerned that the state rule is different from that in Ann Arbor should work to change the state rule to be like that of Ann Arbor, which is better for both pedestrians and drivers. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who'd like to speak? Yes.
Jim Mogensen. So my rule is that the laws of physics override the laws of people. And I remember I was the first person to yield for anyone under the crosswalk law. And I know this because I was at the city council where it was passed, and I was the only member of the public still there. And I then, on the way out, yielded for then Councilman Mike Anglin with my chance. Right, and my concern was that nobody knows about this. And indeed, I used to live on northeast Ann Arbor. The next week, someone rear-ended the police chief. And in fact, my mother, a delivery person who didn't know about the rule yet, was intentionally rear-ended by a delivery person who was angry that she was not moving. And a bus driver had to stop a bus and get out and tell him, yes, indeed, she is supposed to yield. I now live on Packard Street. It was an interesting trip here. And when I leave, it's yet another interesting trip. I'm in favor of pedestrian safety. And my concern is, one time, I sometimes come here, I go to St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, and I was at the crosswalk at Division and Ann Street. It's a real tricky thing. And there was a police officer behind me. And I didn't want to get a $140 ticket, so I yielded. The police officer didn't. It was close, but he didn't hit her. It's amazing to me that more people don't get hit in Ann Arbor. I'm in favor of figuring that out, but we have to find a way. We assume, because in my little circle, like my mother, everybody knows what the rules are. But the reality is most people don't. We're in this connected society where we think everybody knows. When I come into town, I know if I come at a special time, if I'm in a play rehearsal or something, I come at the same time, I know which students are going to walk across. And my only rule is, you need to look. I will yield for you, but not everybody knows that. People come from Brighton, people come from Dexter, people come from, right, all over the place, and they drive in, and they don't know what those rules are. Remember when we had the parking enforcement challenge, and even people on Nixon Road, and probably most of that was regular local people, didn't really understand the rules yet, and we had been pretty far into that. So I'm concerned about this. I understand on both sides what the deal is, and I think we just need to figure out how to make sure people are safe. Pedestrians aren't supposed to walk in front of cars, right? It's part of the ordinance to protect the people in cars. So if there is an accident, both people didn't do what they were supposed to do, right? It says if you're not supposed to walk in front if someone is not able to stop. It's a real challenge. Even coming here today at the corner of Packard and Division, real tricky, that's another tricky intersection there, where you're supposed to yield to the pedestrians, but then the light changes, and it's very, very complicated. And not everybody knows what's going around. People go around you when you're yielding. It's amazing. So I hope we just can figure out a way to make it safe for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Is anyone else who'd like to speak? All right, then public commentary is ended. We have a presentation about Get Downtown. Welcome.
And I'll just update that Commissioner Kleinman is present, so that will be reflected in the roll call. Thank you.
Great. So thanks for having me back on a completely different topic from when I was here in November. I'm Chris Simmons. I am the Business Services Program Manager for AAATA, which also means I get the privilege of being the Program Director for the Get Downtown program. I've been asked to do kind of a smorgasbord of projects here, but mostly talking about our program survey of downtown employers and employees, and hopefully provide the highest of the highlights to help you as you examine the transportation issues for specifically downtown Ann Arbor. For those who don't know, the program was actually co-created back in 1999 by the Downtown Development Authority, the RIDE, the city, and the Chamber of Commerce. But today remains a partnership between the DDA, the city, and the RIDE. And we're continuing to focus on multimodal approaches to look at both the employers and their needs as well as the employees and their needs. There has been some confusion over time as to whether or not, since we're now housed within the RIDE, as to whether it's just a bus program. It is not. We are just as interested in biking and walking and telecommuting as we are about transit ridership and as we are about carpool and vanpool usage. So our goal is truly to encourage the use of all the transportation options for employees to meet the needs and for their employers to be able to have the level of talent and diverse workforce that they are choosing to have. So periodically, we conduct a program survey. You can see there the years that we have conducted that survey. And we call it a survey. Technically, it's actually two done pretty much concurrently. One is to the business decision maker, so that can be a manager or an owner, talking about what their business needs are, and that is regardless of whether they are participant in the GoPass program or not, as well as downtown employees. Again, we've got about a 5,000 person mailing list, which includes employees from all different modes, and it doesn't matter, again, whether they have a GoPass or not. So our 2018 version included responses from 77 decision makers and 380 employees. Pretty representative group of what we know to be downtown. The statisticians will come back and quibble about statistical validity. Let's not get into that. The baseline is that this is pretty valid for what we're able to get for voluntary responses for both downtown employees and decision makers. So we're testing for a number of pieces from the decision makers. One, are you aware of the program's existence? Are you aware of the program's benefits? And then trying to get a better sense of the business needs of what those businesses are looking for from our program. Much of our funding goes into marketing and outreach and, frankly, one-to-one consulting with businesses. So it helps us to know exactly what they're looking for so we can help fine-tune what our program offers them. From a general standpoint, folks are pretty aware of what we do. The carpool parking piece that we indicate at the bottom of this is not as well known, and I think that's because we don't have a very robust awareness of carpool parking in downtown, period. I'll get into a little bit of that when we get into the employee section. We generally ask is the program a benefit to your business in general? That's a fairly hefty response that decision makers do think we are of benefit to them. And what the professional surveyors will tell you is the fact that nobody said, and I realize there's a double negative here, but nobody said that there is no benefit to the program at all is actually remarkable. You'd expect at least somebody to say that the program has no benefit to them, but you did not get that response in this survey at all. So regardless of how well they are using their services or how much they're using our services, they see the program as being of benefit to them in downtown. And again, we take a look at trying to fine-tune the needs of the organization. What type of organization are you? Are you a traditional 8 to 5 type of business? Are you providing open business hours at all sorts of different times? And the answer is we've got a very large mix of businesses in downtown, which is great from a viability standpoint for downtown, but can also make it challenging as you're trying to dial in transportation solutions that meet everybody's needs in the process. And then, since this has been coming up quite a bit recently, we asked the question this time about how important it was that their business was offering some version of a commuter benefit, whether it's just the GoPass or something else, as a way to recruit and retain those employees. We've especially been hearing a lot of this out of the hospitality industry. And you can see the responses there. They range from helpful to critical. And if you're a wonk like me and wade all the way into the 80-page report with its graphs and statistics, you'll also get more information about why that's important to them and how that did impact their choice to remain in downtown if they had a choice put in front of them. In general, the fact that these employers have this option being offered to them is at minimum helpful and at maximum critical for their operations. So then we flip to the commuter side of this, and one of our questions we ask all the time is, what is your usual mode to get to work? And most people, when looking at this graph, will focus on the 42% who are driving alone to work every day and go, what do we do about that 42%? I choose to focus actually on the 58% who are doing something else other than driving alone to work. You look at standard census statistics for journey to work and what people use for their mode to work, and this is a remarkable number already for the number of people who are not driving alone. Doesn't mean we don't have work to do, but it does mean that there's a pretty good awareness out there of people and their options for being able to get to and from work without driving alone. The next piece I ask, because this helps dial in what sort of services are needed for what people, is how far is it to and from work? What we actually found in this survey is that this actually kind of neatly breaks down into quartiles. And they're all highlighted there. And that means you have to pitch different options based on how far somebody is coming in to and from work. I would not expect somebody to make a 20-mile walking trip to be able to get to their job, to be able to turn around and make their 20-mile walking trip back home, because they're probably not going to make it to work. So when we look at our services, we have to look at it in terms of distance and who is that market that we're trying to serve with what service. Our advantage as a program is we at least have a service that meets each one of those quartiles. The issue is finding those people and being able to match them with the right information to get them there. Dialing in when we start getting into the people who drive alone every day, because obviously that's still a focus of the program. Can you get them to change, if not fully, at least partially, into using another mode? You know, if they're not interested, it's not worth anyone's time to try and get them to change their mind. They're probably not going to listen to you in the first place. So how do you get at the 25% or 23% that's very interested and the 15% that's just under that? That's a pretty significant percentage of that 42% who reported driving alone saying, yeah, I'd love another option. Talk to me about it. How do I get there? But then we get into which alternatives they're interested in, and this is where I want to call you back also to that quartile piece on how far people are. What we found in this survey is that there's a lot of interest in being able to use the bus to be able to get to work, and a lot of interest in biking. Both of those we think are pretty good given the overall quartiles. But making sure that people have the right information to overcome some barriers or perceived barriers to be able to transition into those modes, that's more of a challenge, and that's where we're trying to set our marketing up as we move forward. How do you help people overcome those barriers? And so we ask what the barrier is. Specifically, the part here that we get a lot of in the survey responses is, oh yeah, I'd love to take the bus all the time, but I can't do it because I have to get kids. Or I'd love to bike in, but I have to get groceries every day on my way home. Well, there might be other ways to go around doing some of that. So you get a lot of I'd love to, buts. We're trying to get at the buts as we do this argument as well, but also a conversion as well. The folks who just prefer to drive, that 9%, they're always going to be there. Doesn't matter what city in the country you're in, there's just people who like driving, and that's fine. They have options already. It's how do we help the other folks be able to take advantage of their full options moving forward. So from our next steps, what we're looking to take this survey towards driving to next is really how do we take this distance to work and the perceived barriers and match that up with our program marketing. Specifically, what we're interested in targeting is the folks who are living 4 miles and in, and how can we help them use a combination of walking, biking, and transit to be able to make that journey to work and journey home. For those 10 miles and out, our focus is truly on how do we help them find carpool partners and van pool partners through the Van Ride program to be able to make that trip more affordable and more accessible for them. And specifically doing more of a networking push on our carpool matching app that we partnered with SEMCOG on for commuterconnectmi.com. And then for those who are in the middle, continue to use and promote the Go Pass. The awareness is very high. The ridership is very steady. So it's really just a matter of making sure that those employers are taking care of and managing their individual employer programs with those. Additionally, the first Go Pass was issued in 2000, so we're going to figure out a way that we're celebrating 20 years of Go Pass next year. I have yet to get creative on that because it's the ride's 50th anniversary, and so I can't celebrate too many anniversaries at the same time. It just gets confusing. So we're going to figure that out, and you can expect some messaging around that for 2020. And then we're going to try and figure out how we get people to overcome those perceived barriers, the need to drive. Can we promote other options for midday trips? Can we show folks how people can take advantage of the car sharing opportunities that are already in downtown to be able to make that trip so that they don't have to do their own vehicles? And there are some of the downtown co-working spaces that are already trying to find ways for their participants to be able to take advantage of that. How can we encourage more of that sort of thinking? Arbor Bike, as it relaunches, is certainly an opportunity for folks to take a midday trip without bringing their car in. And then, transit is certainly an option, especially if you're in downtown. You've got 15-minute service to much of the rest of the community in one way or another. Maybe you're not driving in, but you can use that Go Pass to be able to make those midday trips and at least leave your car parked. So these are the sorts of things we're going to be exploring with downtown employers. As well as our partners with the city and the DDA. These are the sorts of efforts that we look at as being collaborative. Not one person can do it all, or in the case of our program, not two people can do it all. We have to work with everybody in the community, and our community in this case is those folks who live, work, and own businesses downtown. Which is why I would be remiss if I didn't remind the commission that the Commuter Challenge is coming up very shortly. If your employer has not bombarded you with messaging yet on participating in the Commuter Challenge, you should become a team captain and go to Commute and Win and sign up. The Spring Challenge is the team challenge, as I know Mr. Lazarus is painfully aware of, given his history of winning in this competition. But we try and base this off of different sizes and different types of companies so that everyone's got a shot. There's a number of random prizes, and it's really not to make sure that everybody and their brother is doing the same thing they've done every day, but really give an excuse for people to maybe try that bike trip into downtown that they hadn't thought of before, or actually reach out to that coworker that lives maybe on the other side of Brighton from them and be able to carpool in. That's the sort of thing we try and do with the challenge. Less about overall numbers and more about, hey, you really do have options. This is an excuse to try it. And, if they sign up and at least complete one of these commutes, they've got a free coupon to Washtenaw Dairy. So, it's not like this isn't a win-win for everybody involved here. And then because I was here in November, we figured we'd better talk a little bit about Arbor Bike. Just very briefly, the equipment has all been reviewed for sturdiness and stress tested, and it appears, other than some minor edits, ready to go. We are anticipating a launch date to be coming later this spring. TBD on exactly what that date's going to be. We've still got some pieces in the pipeline that we need to get final dates back from. In terms of future planning, we're actually not taking that part on through the partnership behind the operations for Arbor Bike. We've actually left that to Watts, which has its own grant for studying this, and they've brought in experts from outside the community who really do know bike share quite well to be able to start looking at what a future expansion or edit to the system might look like. And if you're interested in that, I'd encourage you to check out their website at arborbikeshareplan.com. They're hoping to publish their results sometime in July, if I have that right. I think that's right. To be able to talk about what might be able to come next. But in terms of program updates, in terms of launch date and announcements, we'd encourage all of you to check out the new website for the program at arborbike.net. It right now says coming soon because we haven't given you a launch date, but there's a date in the back of my head that I'm hoping we hit. I just don't want to announce it so that if it moves, I'm not disappointed. But we do expect to be up this spring. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that the commission might have. It's a lot of information. It's trying to distill it into something understandable and compact, but happy to answer questions now or commissioners have questions later, happy to take those too.
Thanks, Chris, very much. When I was reading the report, I just wanted to highlight a couple things. When I was reading the report, I found it fascinating that 5 p.m. rush hour really is a 5 p.m. rush hour. Like, it's nothing, and then all of a sudden, it's everything, and then it's nothing. I think that's going to be, one of those challenges that we have to think about if we're designing for 45 minutes of traffic, or are we designing for 24 hours of movement? Anyway, what I wanted to focus on was the bikes. That 36% of people interested in biking is really interesting to me. I'd suggest that you move beyond the 4 mile. And the reason I suggest that for encouragement is that the south side of Ann Arbor, I think, is a 5 mile ride in. And once you get into Pittsfield and Ypsi Township, it's about a 5-6 mile ride in. It's flat, relatively speaking, and e-bikes are a game changer, and they're getting less expensive. So any way that you could bring that encouragement out to those rinks.
And from
I'd
that
love to see
standpoint,
that.
that's why we try and partner a lot with the WBWC, the Bike Alliance, and Common Cycle. I don't consider myself a bike expert, but
Sure.
I like to coordinate with the people who are, and to the extent that we can find those pathways and make those of more interest. The piece I'd also recommend on the biking side is if you go to the carpool matching app, and I probably should have given you a screenshot, but if you go to commuterconnectmi.com, it's not just about matching for carpools and van pools. It's actually an entire multimodal trip planning effort that also includes options for individuals to show themselves as bike mentors or walking mentors for people who are interested in perhaps taking that same trip but aren't confident in figuring out how to do so. So it's a really interesting tool that we haven't fully developed the marketing behind. But I think as we look at that, what do you do for 4 miles? What do you do for 6 miles? Or from where? I'm hoping to use that tool a little bit more and maybe create some of those options for some of the mentors to encourage folks who would not otherwise take that trip.
I really like that idea. That's great. Thank you.
I had a similar thought when I was listening to this presentation about e-bikes in particular, and how they changed the game a bit. We just converted our cargo bike this year and are doing the kindergarten commute every day with our kid on the back, and it's been fantastic, where before the hill going to the west side was a big mental barrier, and now it's no big deal. And so one thought I had while listening to that is the University of Michigan program that does the driver behavior research. Did a program where they lent out e-bikes to do to incorporate cyclist behavior. I don't know if they would be a partner or if something like that could be something that we could look at, we'll loan you an e-bike for a week so you can just try it and just have a queue of people who are interested in the technology, but it's an expensive commitment, so they might not want to commit. And just taking it for a test ride isn't, at the shop isn't really enough to give you a sense of what it feels like to actually do the commute. So that could be a really cool idea, and I don't know how to make that happen, but and if I talk to people and I have some ideas, I'll send them your way. But and I hope other people might too. But that I think would be they really sell themselves. As the first time I rode one from Maple all the way downtown with my daughter, borrowed it from a friend. It completely changed my perspective, and I was like, oh yeah, we're doing this. And I think a lot of people would make the switch if they had the opportunity. And so there's a big opportunity there, I think.
I completely agree with you. I think it is a game changer, and it's one that we're trying to figure out how we help people into that game but not be necessarily the thought leader on that, because our focus is those downtown employees, and that's more system-wide. But how do you make that connection into the process, and how are we helpful with that? Let's just say I've got some things in the works that aren't quite ready for prime time that we're working on to help do that too.
And I'll also say I've appreciated the expansion of the covered parking downtown, when the DDA has been really responsive in listening to cyclists as parking spaces have been getting filled up to adding capacity, locked bike rooms, everything else has been great to see. So, and I've noticed it filling up more and more, so it's great.
Any other questions or comments? All right,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Much easier than reading the whole study. All right, we have a report from the Micromobility Committee. Briefly, I believe.
Very briefly, we haven't met since the last meeting. There is a draft ordinance that we've discussed previously that is waiting for review from the city's legal department. So as soon as we get that feedback, we'll take one more pass, I think, before it comes back to this table seeking recommendation.
And do you want to say anything about the contract that the city just signed, or are you not aware?
I don't know anything about that, but if Mr. Hess or Mr. Lazarus have any information about Spin or what happened with Bird.
Yeah, so back in November, I think many of you are, well, back in September, Bird came to town and kind of caught us by surprise, and we, John Fournier, the assistant city administrator, kind of took the lead in drafting with the legal department a kind of operator agreement for the scooters in town. And during the course of that 3 months, and the contract was for 3 months, so for Bird, it went from November to February. And we found that Bird wasn't really holding up to all the parts of the agreement that they had agreed to. And so staff was prepared to not give a favorable recommendation for the renewal of that agreement. In the meantime, there were other scooter providers that had approached the city that were a little bit more cooperative in terms of how to develop the program and how to share data and, you know, make sure that there's a system in place for, you know, mitigating scooters that aren't parked appropriately, especially if they're on the sidewalk and places where they shouldn't be. And so right now, it looks like, you know, Spin is kind of the operator that was just approved by council. And so again, it'll be a similar, it's pretty much the same terms as the other agreement with Bird. So it's 3 years, but I think there's an opportunity to extend if they're meeting the terms of that agreement.
Did you mean months?
I'm sorry?
Did you mean months or did you mean years?
3 months. Did I say 3 years? I'm sorry, 3 months. Sorry, yeah. 3 months, but there's an extension, or there's a possibility for extension built into the contract as well.
Thanks.
Can I ask sorry, I have a quick question for you, Raymond, about that. Do you know whether the draft language, like, because I think some of what's in the draft language is different from what would be in an agreement with Spin.
Right.
Do you know what how that'll be dealt with if the draft language eventually gets adopted?
I think probably to be determined, but one of the reasons why we are doing them in kind of these short durations is it gives us the ability to, you know, make adjustments to both that operator agreement reflective of anything that comes out of that ordinance. So I think there's that opportunity to do that.
Thanks.
Thank you. And Brad, do you want to talk about the CIP committee?
Sure, sure. Cyrus is very much missed on that committee. And this list actually reflects probably the last time that he was here. I think he put together the list for us, drafted that list. The only thing I'll draw attention to is that the CIP committee has requested to see the plans for Platte Road that run from Washtenaw to Glenwood. We're asking to see actual detailed engineering rather than the concept, just because it's such a potential high pedestrian cycling destination with County Farm Park, Berry Lou Recreation Center, all the retail there. There's a bookstore across Washtenaw and a Whole Foods, as well as a school. And a lot of folks also use that intersection into Scheffler Park to get across and then cut into a neighborhood. So this is going to be a tricky but interesting project, I think, that we want to get a little bit more insight on.
All right. Thanks. Thanks for carrying the weight in the committee.
So would the commission then like to make a motion to accept that list of projects that are requested for review? That's what you've done in the past years. So,
I think we should do that, yes.
okay.
Yes.
I will move to accept the CIP list of projects requested for review.
Okay, that's seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Any comments or questions about?
So what, I mean, I see that some of these say they're presented and we had presentations on that. What does accepting this mean, actually? I'm a little confused. Like, okay, we've had the presentation. Does that mean it's gonna come back to us again?
My understanding is that it's likely not going to come back to us again, that when it was presented, there wasn't any,
Yeah.
you know, the Stone School, for instance, the plan looks great to me. You know, I don't know if we need to see detailed engineering like we do on the more complicated sections.
Yeah, I'm just a little confused as to what this vote means because,
It's accepting the committee's recommendation. The committee may also see these things again and bring it to the commission as needed.
And I think there are a couple that the commission has not yet seen. And so there was a committee that was appointed by the commission to look at the CIP and to say, these are the ones that we think are important for the Transportation Commission to look at. And so this motion, even though some of these presentations have already come, it's the commission's opportunity to, as a body, say that the work of the committee is supported. And if there are commissioners that feel otherwise, that this would be the opportunity, it's establishing buy-in in what the committee's work that has been done. And those presentations that have come already sort of needed to come because of where those projects were in the process, and we didn't want to miss the opportunity. So we didn't want to wait for this formality to happen to hold up those presentations. We knew they were going to be requested, so we brought them at a more appropriate time.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess I'm wondering why there isn't any recommendations, why it's just a list here, like, just,
I think if you look at the committee charge, the committee doesn't make those decisions, but highlights them for the commission. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. That would be why.
okay.
The committee does have opinions on things. Okay, shall we vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seems like it's unanimous. Great. The next agenda item is to talk about the E exercise. And some of that material you got in advance with the agenda, and some of it trickled in, including another piece for tonight. I think that it's not entirely clear what the next step will be, because we had to look at this material in order to know what those next steps are. If there are things that jump out at you that you can comment on, or in general, we can discuss this for 20 to 30 minutes. But I think that part of this is for Kayla and I to have time to look at it, integrate it into future agendas. But certainly, if there are priorities or issues that pop up, then this is a great time to say that. But we haven't had a whole lot of chance to look at it either. So, but thank you for doing the work, those of you who did, yes.
Could you say a little bit more about going forward, how we could use these reports? So, I mean, Cyrus actually sent me this. I think we got it in a meeting, but there was a, part of the charge was to come up with some action steps or follow-up requests. And, I mean, are these things that we would discuss as a committee and potentially adopt, or, I'm not sure.
As a commission, yes.
As a commission, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think particularly, we have agenda items for the future, and I want to make sure that these pieces are integrated into those agenda items, and that we're looking at it more holistically rather than piecemeal.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I found it hard to just think about engineering as a isolated thing and not think about the other pieces. So I really like the idea of integrating them.
That's definitely part of it. Kathy?
Yes, in terms of evaluation, I looked at a number of things, but one that's really troubling is pedestrian crash data. And the more I look at it, the more questions come up, so I'm pleading for some help. And for example, in the first 3 months of this year, we've had 23 pedestrian crashes, and of those, 11 were from left turns. A vehicle was making a left-hand turn and hit a pedestrian. So I hope to get some help and look at this, and maybe there are some more short-term, immediate actions that we can take based on this. I don't know what they would be, and they'd probably be engineering, but it's just really troubling, the number of left turn pedestrian crashes.
Okay, so that's an item that we could highlight for looking at in the near future. Yes.
To go along with that comment, I was really interested in the bullet point on one of the equity summaries that mentioned disparity in pedestrian fatality rates based on race and social class. So I would like to get more background on that and statistics and information. I think that'd be helpful.
Okay. So you're taking note of this, Kayla? Thank you. Yeah.
I think in my report, it was generally, I guess we kind of have these two equity reports, but they both serve different purposes because there's equity in like modes and equity among like people, like, and I was kind of thinking more from the modes, and I guess my point was just the way we treat, like, as far as like what we're going to do with roads, like whether we're going to widen or make them more narrower or whatnot, like the equity of how we deal with like the effects on like vehicular travel versus non-vehicular travel, and how know we have these like level of service things, but I don't know how we take into account non-vehicular travel, and just the other thing is also in land use, the way we have like parking minimums, but we don't have requirements for other kinds of access. I don't know. I mean, it seems like we don't necessarily emphasize those as much, and just how we can essentially encourage better, like a better balance there that takes all people into account regardless of mode. And I know a lot of established metrics and like design tends to favor automobiles and look at vehicular travel, and
Which I would say is an outmoded concept.
yeah.
And partly because vehicles are going to shift in their role so much. Yeah, Kathy?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about what I'd call demographic equity. And as a school board member, I tried to focus on that, just looking at the quality of our schools. And we provide safety busing when it's not safe for children to walk when they're within a mile, and now I think it's 1.5 miles. And I saw much more of that in the wealthier communities than the schools that had a greater number of free and reduced lunch programs. And one of the problems was that parents would come and say, well, if we don't get what we need, then we're going to go to a private school. So you had that force going. And I think that equity for pedestrian safety is really important. I was talking to a Detroit City Council member, and they put many bike paths in downtown Detroit. And so the impression is a lot more wealthy young people are riding their bikes in Detroit. But what he said is the group of people most likely to be killed with a pedestrian crash is an African-American male over 55 years old riding in his neighborhood. And so these tend to be people who are riding because of necessity, and so they're not benefiting yet from all these new bike lanes that are being put in the downtown area in the areas that are attracting wealthier young people. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
we definitely have to be aware of it.
I had actually another comment that was about, it was kind of demographic, but it was a little different as far as like demographics, like traveling, like as far as like transit, like right now, we have a lot, like overnight, there's no bus service, and all there is night ride, which is more expensive and inconvenient, and also like really depending on what areas, like our bus system is heavily oriented around downtown, so if you're not traveling to or from downtown, it can be a lot less convenient, and I feel like there perhaps needs to be like more look at how the transit system serves, and like, yeah, I feel like the network, they've developed it, and yeah, there needs to be more outreach as far as like, because I know like the RTA, they're doing the Citizens Advisory Committee, whereas AAATA, I mean, aside from when they've done like their whole 2014 expansion, it's been more limited as far as that, and I feel like we need to look at that more, because I think there's certain like commuter peaks in downtown tends to be favored in the transit, whereas, yeah, the others, and also there's things like people with disabilities, A-Ride, and how that works compared to the fixed route bus system, and
So is there a current report or evaluation on that topic for AAATA?
well, I mentioned that in my report. Are you asking about if AAATA has a report on that?
Yes.
I don't know.
So that's something to follow up on, to find out like what is the existing information and how much work would be involved in finding out.
Yeah, and my understanding is the AAATA is going to be updating kind of their long-range plan as well in the coming, well, starting in the coming months. So there is some opportunity for, having the transportation plan update for the city be complementary to the one from the ride and vice versa. So we've been having some initial discussions with AAATA staff, just making sure that there's some opportunity for coordination. One thing that what we've said at the staff level is, it's not for the city to necessarily plan the rides system or the ride to plan the city system, but if there's a way for the two plans to be complementary to one another, then in theory we can kind of achieve that. So I think identifying some of the goals that Commissioner Hull just mentioned could be reflected in either plan or both.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that. So we have about 10 minutes left in this discussion. Yeah.
As I was reviewing these, a couple of things came to mind. One is sort of short-term, where do we go next? And I think Julie's engineering piece is a perfect example of smaller asks that we could ask staff to help us with. For instance, how do we get system-wide data going, right, and understanding networks and connectivity and that kind of thing, instead of looking just at crash reports. Additionally, and this came up in two of the reports, how do we account for near misses or perceptions of not feeling safe? And then the fourth one, the speed reduction task force, the question is if there's obstacles in implementing, what are those obstacles? That would be good to identify those. Those seem like they're fairly, I don't want to say straightforward, but they can be near-term sort of asks. The longer, bigger piece, I think, so I drafted the equity piece that I basically summarized the Federal Highway Administration because, as you probably saw in the other one, there's a whole list of resources. I spent a lot of years in grad school, and this felt like that again. It is a huge topic. It's new. There's not really standards here yet. There are really great examples, but you got to dig, you got to search, and you got to think. And I think that this is really important and it's really promising. So I can invest some time in this, but I need help, and I think I need somebody who's paid to do these sorts of things to help this commission. So that might be part of the Project Zero, Vision Zero, sorry. That might be part of the Vision Zero plan stepping forward, right? Have some sort of subgroup really tackle this and try to come up with the best examples from various communities. Because 1, 2, 3 commissioners aren't going to be able to really do it justice. And it's really exciting, and it's I think that people are going to be passionate about pursuing it.
So the one thing that tickles my brain about that is that we don't want to sort of randomly say, well, the staff should give us this or that information, but actually do it in a more coherent and unified fashion. And so a future resolution request that we could draft that said, this is the kind of information that we need in this kind of form, in this frequency, would probably actually be what would be helpful.
For all of the E's, right?
Yeah. So I'm not sure how to write that at this point, but we can do that.
Yeah, and if I made a Commissioner Parsons' point, you know, I think that point is well taken, that really where I think there's an opportunity here is if the Transportation Commission gives kind of some direction that can be incorporated into the transportation plan. And that direction can be several different things, right? It could be best practice, it could be, you know, metrics, benchmarks, goals related to any of these things. I don't, my expectation, this is just Raymond speaking, wasn't necessarily to have, you know, you do all the number crunching and all that. I think the idea is give us some direction, and staff and or the consultant can see how this plugs into either that plan or, you know, a separate document, for example, or, you know, find out kind of the best pieces. So yeah, I think really what we're looking, maybe at least what I'm thinking of is, you know, point us in a direction on each of these E's and what are the things we should be kind of, what should be on the radar. And then we can kind of continue to refine that over time and figure out how to plug it into like the transportation plan in particular, so that we can identify benchmarks, goals, metrics, whatever the case may be.
So just a few minutes more remaining. Other comments or suggestions? Yeah.
Another thing I came across, and we've been using it in Ann Arbor as well as Pittsfield Township, is the electronic radar speed signs. And what I found on the internet, and there were a lot of references on Wikipedia that looked like they were reputable sources, although I didn't look at all of them, showing a definite reduction in speed, especially for people who are driving 10 or more miles above the speed limit. And the price of these devices are going down, and they not only immediately provide feedback so that drivers reduce their speed, but they also capture the speeds that are they capture that data over time, so you know what speed people are driving different hours of the day, say. So I would be inclined to say, let's look at this in more detail, and this might be something that the Transportation Commission wants to recommend as a short-term action for reducing speed limits. Not speed limits, but reducing speeds.
All right.
I'll just briefly confess to being the person who didn't do their homework and apologizing for that, but this is helping me understand much better what I should be doing for enforcement, so I will plan to have my report for next month.
Great. Life happens.
Indeed.
Sure does.
And just as a reminder, you know, staff. Oh, sorry. Just as a reminder, staff is available. You know, if you'd like to reach out to me and my team, we'd be happy to assist with that. I know Commissioner Bolin had asked for help from staff, and so she coordinated with Cyrus on that. So feel free to contact me, and we can try to talk through this to the extent that we can be of assistance. So
I think we've got a good amount to move forward on.
So in terms of next steps, do the commissioners that have worked on draft reports and those that haven't yet worked on draft reports want to prepare a second draft to bring for the next meeting, incorporating some of what you heard in the discussion tonight? Or I just want to be clear on where we stand with next steps, recognizing that we're not expecting that these issues are going to be solved or the all of the recommendations identified, but having something to hand off for the commission to take action on perhaps at the next meeting, is that the goal? Or do you want to talk more about where you're going from here?
Yeah, I need some time to sort of sit with it.
Okay.
And see what we've got.
Okay.
Putting it together especially. Kathy?
I'd also like the opportunity to talk to other members about engineering, because there was some overlap, and then also with equity, because some of the evaluation showed gaps in, in equitable delivery. So
Okay.
would we be able to do that and then maybe bring back something at the next meeting, or do you want us to wait until you've had a chance to look at the reports?
No, don't wait.
Oh,
But
okay.
If there's, if it's going to be a real discussion, then let's do it out in public with the open meetings.
But just contacting individual people, like if I wanted to
That-
make a contact with enforcement or equity.
That should be
That's
fine,
fine.
but if you have any doubts or questions, then Kayla can help you work that out.
Right, sharing resources with each other is fine. If you feel that you're looking to have discussions that are deliberations that would inform potential recommendations that you might make in your report, then I think we could schedule some type of a meeting that would be open to the public, and it would allow all of the commissioners working on e-reports to come together. So let me know if that's something that you would like.
Great.
I'll just say real quick that this feels more like fact-finding right now than putting together recommendations and deliberating. So if there are people who want to reach out, I would encourage it, and we'll just keep it to the fact-finding and try to get the best description of each thing together so that we can move forward.
Great. Is it the budget or the crosswalk that comes next? Crosswalk. Okay, then moving on to the next item. We were asked by City Council to review a suggestion to amend the crosswalk ordinance, and you have a copy of that proposed amendment. And I don't know if there's a status update, given that, yeah.
Yes, I wanted to withdraw that language as a local ordinance, and Councilmember Nelson wanted me to wait until the Disability Commission met today to talk about it. But there is action on a state crosswalk law that would negate the need for a discussion about any local ordinance amendments, and I will withdraw that at the next, I'll bring forward a resolution to withdraw that at the next council meeting.
So does that withdraw council asking us for input? No, not
I
yet.
can't speak on behalf of
No, you
council.
can't.
Maybe we should provide input anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What I'm wondering also is if this is going to perhaps come back once the state has a crosswalk law, if it is different from our existing law, and if they would want us to possibly adopt what the state has, and there might be some concerns there depending on what the state has, and
right. So far, what I've heard is that this commission would like to speak again. You have in your packet the information about our little crosswalk history, which includes the resolution that we made on November 15th, which was short and sweet, but I'll read it. The Transportation Commission recommends that City Council maintains the crosswalk ordinance in its current iteration based on the review and discussion of the ordinance that the commission has had and the research that has been done by staff. And that's what we passed unanimously back in November. So we can affirm that if we wanted to. I'm seeing lots of head nodding. We can also say something stronger if we wanted to. What's your pleasure?
I was prepared to talk a lot about this, but our first speaker stole my thunder. So thank you for pointing out your excellent points, particularly that different cities and municipalities need to adjust for the types of users that they have and what makes sense. So I will be reaffirm our current language or make it stronger. And I don't know how much more I need to weigh in unless others want to argue the point.
Not yet, yeah. So is there any other path, any other option that people would like to consider other than affirming our previous motion? I don't see any.
A little, I think we just decided to not weigh in until the state came back with any changes.
Actually, that's not what I heard.
No, I would like to reaffirm the current language and address the state issues that may potentially arise. But this was about changing the sidewalk law independent of what's going on at the state.
Yeah.
By
But I don't think we weighed in, like officially, we didn't pass anything saying anything about the current language. We just didn't.
We did in November, yes.
No, I was saying the Disability Commission.
Oh,
today.
okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, and we don't have the language or the information about the state law at this point, so, yes.
Just something to consider, if the state changes or makes a state law and adds it to the Michigan Vehicle Code or the Uniform Traffic Code, we have adopted those by reference. So as far as a new existing ordinance, if it's comparable to what we have now or stricter or whatever it is, we would still have enforcement power over that under the city code.
Thank you.
Okay, so we might add to this motion that we would like to look into the state law, I'm not sure exactly how to word this, but any draft state language of being consistent with Ann Arbor crosswalk. If I could be so bold.
So you're saying we'd like to find out more about that and talk about it here? Or more about the state, what the state is planning to do?
That's another option.
I would like to find out what the state is planning, but also strongly reaffirm the language that we have
Okay.
right now. I don't think we need to wait, but it'd be nice to be prepared going forward. Maybe putting it on an agenda in the future. Does that?
So would we still be timely if we had that as an agenda item for next month? So May meeting, we would look at the state proposal and,
I think we can pull that together. I'm not involved firsthand with the state crosswalk ordinance revision. I'm not sure who at the city might be, but I can reach out and see if we can get someone lined up. But we can work towards that for our meeting in May is May 15th, so it comes a little soon. But we can try to get that together. If anyone has anything else to add.
okay, so two separate motions. Although actually the agenda item for May doesn't have to be a motion, but I'm going to suggest we do that anyway. Scott?
I have a question, and which, depending on the answer, I'll make some suggestions. And this, I think, probably goes to staff. So if the state passes a new ordinance, do we know if it will preclude us from having our own standards, or is that dependent on how the state drafts that particular ordinance? Do we know?
That's what was just mentioned.
Well, not exactly. So I think
Okay.
Sergeant Clock's point was that if the state passes the ordinance, it will be immediately part of our code by reference, so it will be adopted automatically. But if we also have our own ordinance, would our own ordinance also apply, or would it be obliterated? That's the sort of the question. And because I know in some cases, like the state regulates things and we can't change it, and in other things we can. So I don't know if we know or I can anticipate what that'll look like.
You know, I think that depends on the form of what the state legislature passes. So I don't think we can say one way or the other right now.
Okay, then my preference would be, and I think this is where maybe we're going, is that we should just reaffirm the language for the local ordinance, and a preference to keep it the way it is, whether or not anything happens at the state level, and we can also have a conversation about what the impact is on this, with the state ordinance when it comes.
So I'll take a motion to affirm basically the exact same language as we had previously. And the second motion after that will address the future agenda item.
I would move to have our current language reaffirmed.
Seconded by, all right. Any other discussion?
A bill to unify state crosswalk laws was introduced last session, but it didn't go anywhere. I cannot predict what will happen this year, but nothing has been introduced yet. So there's no reason for me to believe that in May that there will be any kind of crosswalk bill.
Kathy?
I just make that statement just based on a search in the Michigan legislature site for the word crosswalk.
There isn't a bill and there isn't approved language, but there is language that was approved by MDOT, and it's in legislative services right now. And so no one really knows when it'll come out of legislative services, because it's sort of a first in, first out, and they do everything in order.
Yes, sometimes it takes the Legislative Service Bureau a couple of days, sometimes it takes them a couple of months.
Right.
Okay, any other discussion, or shall we vote? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, one opposition. Any abstentions? All right, it has passed. I'll take a motion to have this be on the May agenda for addressing the state law. Does that language make sense to you, Kayla?
A motion to discuss the state crosswalk law at the May 15th Transportation Commission meeting.
And to take action.
And to take action.
Is that,
If it exists.
Right, right, that's part of the finding out.
we can still comment where it is. Kathy, you're seconding that, or?
I was just seconding,
Okay,
yes.
I missed who made the motion, so it was Kleiman and Griswold. Thank
okay.
you.
Any discussion on that motion? All right. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have that unanimously. Great. And now, we'll talk about the budget. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the allocation of the resources our community will entrust with us for the coming year. On Monday, I had the opportunity to present my budget recommendation to council. I do apologize. I was supposed to do this last month, and I was detained in Lansing due to forces beyond my control. But the advantage of doing it this evening is the budget is much better formed, and you still have the opportunity to weigh in, both by making a recommendation to council, including those things you might like to see changed, if any. This is a very comprehensive approach. We are fortunate this year to be able to have sources of funds that we didn't have in the past and use those responsibly, not only to advance items of concern to our community, but also to look with an eye to the future and act in a very fiscally responsible manner. As we know, good times don't last forever. So I'll give you fair warning. A lot of these slides are very wordy. They're meant to be as much of a reference as they are a presentation. I'm not going to read every one, but you do have that for your reference as you discuss. And even after this evening, if you want to bring things up separately to your elected officials, this can provide a base for you to do that as well. So when you look at the budget for next year, the total budget expenditures are about $430 million total. $111 million of that is in the city's general fund. That is actually about an 8% increase in expenditures. Much of that is driven by salaries and personnel costs, many of which are governed by union, but there are some new funding opportunities in there as well, and I'll talk about that. All of our fund balances will remain within the city's policy goals. The general fund balance at the end of the two-year fiscal plan will be at 17.4%, which is midway in the 15 to 20% goal that the city has. All of our general obligation bond rating is at a very healthy AA+ from Standard & Poor's, and you can see the increase impacts to our residential rate and taxpayers, total of about $11 a month. I do note that the actual property tax rate under Headley went down. This is the total funding by priority, and I broke it down by areas of interest. I combined both street repair and maintenance and active transportation as one, and that funding went up by 4.3%. As you look down the list, there are some things where council has made the decision to really put some oomph in priorities that may have languished in the past. Those include climate action and sustainability, affordable housing, and community mental health. As I mentioned at the start, it's a very robust budget in terms of putting money aside for things that are important. But as I talk about additional funding, I want you to bear in mind that almost 40% of that new funding that is in the budget goes towards reserve accounts. So it is responsible in that way also. There's some capital improvements that we need to do that we need to start putting money into sinking funds for as well. But this gives you an idea of where the city's priorities are and how much we've been able to adjust each one of those. New funding in the budget is about $4.25 million. You can see where the funding goes in the right-hand column. The safe drinking water, and sewer infrastructure, really that money goes towards needed dam repairs that are a general fund obligation. And all of this funding you see here is in the general fund. So as you look at that, the two that I've highlighted in red are items of specific interest to the Transportation Commission, both street resurfacing and repair and pedestrian safety projects. The footnote on the bottom references other, which is when we looked at the survey the city did, for which we got the results back on the 25th of March, there are other things that people had mentioned. The areas you see up here were specifically called out in that survey. Every one of these areas meets the proportional amount based on what was in the survey, or it exceeds it based upon both funding from the county millage rebate and other sources. And up top it shows that there's $2.2 million in county millage rebate funds, about $1.9 million from general fund sources, and then an additional dedication of $140,000 from the street millage fund for a specific project. Okay. This year also we're paying attention in detail to performance measures. For the past several years we've included metrics in the budget book, but we haven't really reported on them because we've been validating the numbers, and we report on them from year to year. This year we're going to start posting those on a quarterly basis following internal quarterly reviews. Those measures relate the expenditures to the outcomes we hope to get. We're going to start with fourth quarter FY19 year-end results and then report on them quarterly, putting them on the city's website. In addition to that, we've also developed a set of performance measures, key performance measures, KPIs, that are shown in storyboard format, an example of which is on the right for the police department, and those will also be published externally. The intent there is to answer the public's question, how do you know, or how do we know that you as a city government are doing a good job? This will be updated continuously as we get the data. It'll be populated auto-magically somehow through the mysteries of our data collection and IT system, but you'll see it continually as we can get them. We've done this for fire, police, finance. We're finalizing it for our community services group, and the last and perhaps most complicated is public services. We hope to have all those also posted and available by the end of the current fiscal year. It certainly supports those who want us to be more data-driven in our decision-making. Within the new funding, I'm going to trace where the money goes. So I talked about $350,000 for streets. It goes into public services engineering, and it gets put into the pot with street repair and resurfacing. Of note is that we have experienced increases in costs, some due to materials, some due to demand for services. But everyone around the area has noticed a particular increase, I think somewhere around 12-15% in our cost for resurfacing. And if that's not correct, Raymond, please correct me. On the next couple, on this slide, council has asked for these new funding options that we provide some outcome-based goals. So you've seen the lists of work we want to do. Our goal is to do 80% of what we report on. That gives us an aggressive target, but also recognizes that sometimes things don't work out. We still have the goal of having all of our pavements in good or better condition, which is a rating of 7 or more by 2025. It's going to be a sprint to get there, but you don't lower your standards, you raise your efforts. On pedestrian safety, we have $750,000 in a new funding in addition to what we were allocating before. The $140,000 for the Fuller Crosswalk comes out of the millage or the street millage monies, and that is a specific project that council has asked us to do in FY20. The rest of it goes to various forms of active transportation improvements, mostly crosswalk improvements, but also bicycle facilities. And again, these are the goals supported, the scope, the partners, and then the outcomes. So let's take a look at that as well. And again, these slides are really provided for your reference. We do have an ambitious plan also this year to address lighting improvements, both maintaining the existing lighting we have and then adding lightings based on a priority basis to the highest priority intersections and crosswalks based on staff's evaluation. These are the map shows tentative surface treatments. We did provide the street work plan to council on Monday along with the budget. The map on the right shows all the different types of treatments we're going to use. The funding comes from the street millage, Act 51, funds, grants, and other sources. And the work you see is the result of some in-depth coordination with our utilities work, MDOT, university, DTE, and others. You'll note some of the areas in blue where we're doing resurfacing, rehabilitation. We are starting to focus, as we did last year, on neighborhoods so that we can come in, destroy the peace and harmony in a neighborhood one time, and then you won't see us again for quite some time after that. We also get better pricing when we group the work geographically. What's shown in yellow is a continuation of what we started last year as well, which is capital preventive maintenance. We follow all laws, but the ones we follow the most are the laws of thermodynamics, which means things tend to deteriorate. So we do preventive maintenance to preserve the pavement so that what is in good shape doesn't deteriorate, and we extend that life as well. I talked about lighting and markings. You can see the map here shows the priorities where we're going to be working. We do have an allocation from the county millage rebate, and you can see how it's spread out for new street lights, existing street lights, and ped crossings. And then on pavement markings, there's $667,000 as well. And that gives us 37 miles of long line marking, basically center line, 14 miles of bike lane, and then 375 intersections. So the level of activity over the last couple of years has certainly stepped up. Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Hess, and all the crew deserve a lot of credit for being able to push work out and make our roads better and safer. Some other items of interest, and I'll touch on these lightly. I'm sure in the time we have allocated, you may want to talk about some of those. Some council members have asked me to update you on the North Side Safe Routes to School project. Monday, council set the date for the public hearing on May 20th. I have been in contact with people, with sources at MDOT to look and see if there are ways to adjust the scope of work, as council has asked me to do as well. We have added a senior transportation engineer to the FY20 budget with the idea that person will have expertise in non-motorized active transportation. DDA has presented a lot of the work they're doing. You will see through personal and painful experience that Huron Street will go down to 2 lanes for most of the summer, partially because of DDA's work, partially because we're taking advantage of piggybacking on a DTE project to replace gas lines. That produces a net cost savings to us as well, since DTE will pay for partial street restoration. The Fifth and Detroit project will be done this summer. As you remember, last year we ran into some delays due to the labor disputes that occurred and then the early onset of winter. But you'll see the cones out there this week as well. The Ann and Ashley Garage is scheduled for this year. And my favorite on that list is the William Street Cycle Track, which is also scheduled for this year. Again, working with EDA on that project, the city actually transfers 65% of the cost of the pavement back to EDA for that work. There's also a water main that's part of that project. We talked briefly before about scooters. Pedestrian beacon at Huron, Thayer, and Ingalls and Pioneer High School. The one at Pioneer High School, after a long period of time and much concern from the community, was installed this spring. And we have gotten word from MDOT that the crossing at Huron between Thayer and Ingalls is on their program for next year. We are trying to work with them to accelerate it so we can do it this year. That's tied to the intersection of 3rd and Huron, because MDOT has approved a hog signal as opposed to an RRFB for the Huron at Thayer, and a full signal at 3rd and Huron. So we're trying to get them to let us move the signal from one place to another and try to do it faster. So they'll push MDOT allow us to work in their right-of-way to get that done. There's public meetings going on now about a 4 to 2 lane reduction on Earhart. Some of you have been involved in that. The really good news is the Allen Creek berm opening. We have all the easements, everything is done. We should start construction on that this year. We're hoping for it to be in the June contract letting from MDOT. Got some exciting things on pothole technology, which I am technologically ill-equipped to discuss, but it is basically a spray technology that allow us to repair them faster. And my favorite thing on this slide is we are buying our first hybrid police interceptor. Council approved that on Monday. So police department is leading the way in green fleets procurements as well. So that's kind of a very quick rundown. Hopefully whatever I didn't talk about, Raymond will in his update. But there are a lot of exciting things in the budget. We're certainly going to get to see firsthand what, as the governor calls, FTDR looks like in and around town. So as you are inconvenienced, remember the outcome are better roadways. And with that, whatever questions you may have that I can answer, I'd be happy to entertain.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
So can you just help me interpret the numbers? So like the 220 for pedestrian crosswalk improvements, I have no idea whether I think that's enough or not enough, because I don't know what that buys us.
So there's $750,000 that we put aside for a pedestrian safety program. That is new funding. When you add that into the 2.2 million, I'm sorry, 3.4 million, that's a pretty large increase over the previous year of about 55%. So it buys us crosswalk improvements, striping, lighting, what else is it? Signage. We talked about electronic signals, that's in there. Ms. Griswold talked about the electronic speed signs that tend to slow people down. There's several of those in the budget. There are some electronic school zone signs in the budget as well that we started last year. So it's a lot of work. I've provided to council a more detailed work plan, and all that information is posted in Legistar as part of administrators' communications, also on the Public Services website. It is a lot. We'll be pressed to get all that work done this year, but it is I think a visible commitment that your elected body has taken seriously the importance of non-motorized transportation and is challenging us to deliver a very active program. So I think the real answer is a lot of this stuff and the details you're going to have to look up.
And if I may add to that, Commissioner Boland, one of the reports that was provided to council that Howard is referencing was looking at what are kind of typical costs for different types of design and crosswalk treatments. Now it's kind of a a range, right? Because until we get into a specific design and engineering for a crosswalk, we don't know if a pedestrian refuge island is part of the process. We don't know if there are bump outs as part of it, if it's RFB. But you may recall some of the past discussions we've had about the crosswalk design guidelines. The idea is if it's standard, standard plus, or high risk, depending upon the roadway type, it would get different types of treatments may be applied to that crosswalk. And so we looked historically at what those costs were to kind of come up with ranges for each of those. And so there is a link actually provided in your packet that if you want me to come back at a future meeting, kind of go into more detail on that, I can do that. But I think that in a roundabout way answers your question about how much do these things cost? Is this enough? And kind of helps tease out what some of the low end estimates are and what some of the high end estimates are.
Other questions or comments? Yes.
So, thank you, this was really helpful. My understanding from what you've presented in the slides is that in terms of cycle infrastructure, specifically bike infrastructure, most of that is in the remarking of the roads, that when we're talking about, aside from the William cycle track, that most of the bike infrastructure is painting bike lanes. Is that a fair?
That's correct.
Okay.
One of the challenges that I've laid out for Raymond also is where we can squeeze down the lane width and put some more buffers in between the travel lanes and the bike lanes. We're going to do that wherever we can. Last year, every significant road project we took on had a bicycle lane component to it. So a lot of that work is shown as part of the CIP program and doesn't come out of that particular funding. But our goal is to make it, people feel safe cycling and not just appeal to the hardcore do-or-die cyclists, but those who fall into that general category of interested but have concerns. The other thing that I'd point out as part of the William Street project, we are purchasing some smaller equipment to keep those lanes clear even in the wintertime. And that'll have application in 2020 when DDA also does the one-way to two-way conversions on First and Ashley, and there'll be buffered lanes there as well. So if we're going to be serious about encouraging people to cycle all year round, we're going to have to make sure we keep the lanes clear all year round and not store snow in them.
Any other comments or questions? Yes.
The spending on streets didn't go up very much, but I'm assuming that if we're going to improve the surface of the bike lanes, that's coming out of the street funding. Is that true?
It depends. When we do major street work, it's included in as part of the work. Sometimes it's just a striping project as well. One of the reasons that the street repair and maintenance has stayed a little bit flat, part of that is funding that goes towards capital improvements, and that varies from year to year. And part of that also is on a yearly basis. In the past, we haven't spent all the money that's in the budget, so it rolls from one year to another. When we look at doing major repair work, it's not just the funding, it's coordinating it with water and sewer utility work, and that funding doesn't show up in that amount there. Also, we have availability of contractors, and as much as we'd like to do as much work as fast as we can, people still have to get around, so we have to be wary that we've got to, there's so much you can buy in one year.
Right, and my point was that we have a total for active transportation, but it's probably even more because some of the street fund spending is to improve the bike lane surface. Would that be true?
Well, this number includes more than just general fund.
Pardon me?
This is more than just the general fund monies. This is the CIP as well.
Right, I was just looking at this street repair and maintenance. And so some of those dollars are going to go to repair and maintain the street surface that's actually in the bike lane.
Right, so the capital repair and maintenance program puts on a smooth surface, it seals the roadway, and we restripe, including bike lanes, so you're correct.
Okay. And I had a question. Huron Street, the DDA project, do you know if they're putting positive contrast lighting at the crosswalks on Huron?
I don't know. I will
Oh,
respond
okay.
to that.
Or I can ask them. And I just want to make a statement. I voted on Monday night against the DDA project, and it wasn't because I'm against protected bike lanes. It's because I would really like to have more centralized control of all of our projects. And I know that the DDA, right now, the DDA has money that we don't have, and so we have to be appreciative.
My answer to that is all that money eventually comes from the same place,
Yes.
right?
but-
So that the advantages of having a DDA is that they do maintain and operate our parking system. They do help us fund downtown infrastructure and promote business. And it does come from parking revenues, which really is a user fee, but eventually it's still from everybody's same place. So I think on a broader scale, we all recognize it's all public money. It all belongs to all of us. And yet the fact that we can work together to use that, leverage that funding for the best benefit of the public is important. So just as a personal perspective, it's all public money and we're respectful of all of it.
I totally agree with what you said.
Thank you.
Any other, Scott?
Yep, I just wanted to say I appreciate the establishment of the KPIs and the dashboards to kind of make those data-based goals and measurements digestible to the public. I think having been able to be on this, on these commissions and work with city staff and see how decisions get made, I personally see you all do use data and your expertise and all these other things in feeding into the decisions that we're making, but making that stuff accessible to the public and visible, I think will go a long way to helping build that trust and open up that transparency. So I think that's great to see. And using this as an opportunity to call back to the 6 E's and particularly the evaluation component, I'm really hoping we can establish similar sorts of metrics and goals for Vision Zero as we move forward with our plan and wrestle with what that looks like. Because I think, as people have already highlighted, crash data is important, but it's far from ideal in terms of really assessing how our streets are working, and even places that have sort of really had a great deal of success with Vision Zero are looking at beyond Vision Zero kinds of metrics, recognizing that mode shift not only keeps people safe, but it increases public health and health in general and happiness, and serves climate change goals and other things. So there's there's other big benefits to these kinds of things beyond just the safety, but safety is sort of like the bread and butter, and getting that right is great, is the first step. So.
Well, I appreciate the comment. One thing I did forget to mention is we're also going to start with this quarter posting the quarterly project updates on CIP efforts. So that'll be another source of information and data. I think we all expect that the parameters will change and they'll evolve over time based on what we really need to talk to our public about. But there's an awful lot of effort that staff put into making sure we understand where the data comes from, what's the math to make the calculations so that those numbers are both repeatable and reliable. The biggest challenge we face is establishing benchmarks because there are no regional or national benchmarks for much of what we do. I met with the 15th Circuit Court, District Court this afternoon, and they have a very nice set of metrics, but most of them are either set internally to achieve high levels of customer service. So we'll continue to seek out best practices and see how other people do things, but I would suspect the suite that we've developed will be used and modeled by others as well.
Any other pressing comments or questions?
Oh, I saw the Ann Arbor station on there. I'm just wondering what's like the status of that. I know they're going back and forth with the FRA, and there's just different things being said, and yeah, just wondering what's going on there because it seems like it's been a while since we've heard.
And I agree with you, and we're working on hopefully the last set of review comments we've got from FRA. I think we'd all know that this project has had something of a tortuous past to get to where we are. Over the last year, we've had 2 government shutdowns that have extended the process as well. But we all hope that the finish line is in sight. And the goal really there is to protect the work that we've done to date, to get an approved environmental assessment document. So as we look at what makes sense for us to go forward in the future, we're protecting the value of the work that's been done to date, and get that EA finished, get the preliminary engineering that goes with it finished, so we can then start to make plans for the future, both scheduling and financial.
Right. We have a resolution in response to this presentation, which was included in the packet. So I wonder if we are ready to make a motion concerning that resolution. Anyone interested? All right. Seconded by? All right.
The motion was Griswold and
Yes.
Trudeau?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any comments on the resolution itself, which is to support the budget moving forward through the budget process, the transportation portions of it? All right, then all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It's unanimous then? Thank you. All right, I believe we have transportation updates.
Yes, Madam Chair, you'll note that the transportation update monthly progress report that we give is starting to ramp up, right? We kind of laid dormant during the winter, and now spring has sprung, and all of a sudden you start to see a lot of updates creep up on this report. So I will try to quickly go through and highlight the changes from last month to this month. The first is SIO Church. It mentions that work is scheduled to resume this week and end in early June. We are going to hold a public information session about which alternatives are going to be advanced for both SIO Church as well as 7th and Stadium at a meeting on April 25th at Dickon Elementary School. The Fifth Avenue project, which we talked a little bit about just a moment ago, is going to resume this week as well. The annual street resurfacing project is anticipated to begin in May of next month of 2019. The sidewalk repair program, I believe, just launched this week, so that is up and running as well. North 7th Street, Huron to Miller, we had reported on this late last year, I believe. And striping for this project is anticipated to occur late summer. We're going to get that into the striping schedule. Crosswalk improvements, Commissioner Boland, this is where I mentioned the link is included, kind of embedded there, but we had several deliverables to report to City Council as part of the resolution that they passed. One of them is progress that's being made on a monthly basis, and we're going to share those progress updates with you. And then one of them was also high-level cost estimates, and so that is included in there as well. So some of the improvements that were identified for this quarter, which they'll turn into monthly. This was just the first report. Howard mentioned some of these already, but the crosswalk signage in front of Pioneer High School was completely rebuilt and now includes overhead rectangular rapid flashing beacon signs. School zone signs were installed on Fuller Road and Huron Parkway around Huron High School. School zone signs on Platte Road south of Redwood Avenue were replaced and upgraded, and preventive maintenance was done on all RFBs in the city. That's a task that the signs and signal crew goes out to make sure that the batteries are operational and that those systems are reliable throughout the course of the year. I will note there are some changes to the rectangular rapid flashing beacon list or RFB list. There are a couple of things that have shifted around a little bit. South Maple was added between Benz and Russell Street. There were several South Industrial locations added, and South Main at Fieldcrest was added as well. The one thing I will note is there were a couple locations on Huron Parkway that are actually 2020 projects because they're being funded through a Highway Safety Improvement Program funding that the funding's not going to be available until late fall. So that would be, after October 1st. So those will probably get installed in spring of 2020. Allen Creek berm opening, Howard gave you an update on that already, but there is updated language We are expecting to hit MDOT's June bid letting. There is a new section about the South Side Interceptor sanitary sewer project. It's not really a transportation project, but it is going to have an impact on traffic due to lane closures on Fuller Street and Glen Avenue. So it's really just kind of a heads up that coming in May, there's going to be some interesting travel patterns through an area that's already fairly congested. So keep an eye out on that, and if any commuters go through that corridor, please plan your commute accordingly. The DDA provided updates on their bike parking installations, and it looks like there are about a half dozen or so that are up, several on 4th Avenue, Liberty, a couple on Main, State. So those are up and going, and it looks like they're looking to even expand that program as well. We are in continued negotiations with the AAATA about a new traffic signal at the intersection of Ellsworth and Research Park Drive. We're kind of moving forward with that, and it looks like it's hopefully going to be constructed in fiscal year 2020, but we're working through the design phase now. There is a little bit, we reported on this at the last meeting, so I'm not going to go into much detail, but there's updated language related to the Fuller Road crosswalk sidewalk extension pursuant to the action that council took last month. So the progress report just reflects that. Howard mentioned in the budget under the speed reduction committee recommendations on page 9 of the report. There is talk of the additional staffing levels, the new senior transportation engineer that's being proposed as part of the budget. That language is included in the update as well. And that concludes the highlights of changes from last month to this month.
Thank you, Raymond.
Thanks. Any quick questions or comments? Yes.
I don't know how quick this is going to be. It's only 2 topics. One is the train noise, when we might be seeing survey results from that, and there's some people on Facebook that are apparently antsy because it seems to be proceeding forward, but only got like 25% of the people supported it. I don't know. So, and when we might expect that, and then I'll do the longer one.
So let me get back to you with an answer on that, but
Okay.
I'll include updated language in the next progress report at a minimum, and then give you an update at the next meeting.
Cool. And then I was going to bring it up, but it wasn't part of Mr. Lazarus's budget stuff. It was after the A2 STEAM grant comes up multiple times in our packets, and it sounds like there's now discussion with MDOT. I assume that's to allow single-side sidewalks or something. I don't know. I'm just trying to glean whatever I can. But council apparently has made action. I think an update would be really nice to have.
Yeah, so my understanding is council did approve for a public hearing on this to occur on May 20th. So that's, I believe, step 3 in the process. Right now, you're right, there's still kind of discussion about different design elements, but my understanding is, the design is.
We submitted design at the point where council approved the second resolution, and that was in late December. There have been some asks by members of the community to see if we could get approval for sidewalks on one side of the street. So on behalf of council members, I've asked the director of MDOT to talk to the folks at the Michigan Fitness Foundation to see if there was some way to get a singular one-time exception to their policy. Normally, they only allow a policy exception for topographic reasons or some land use reasons. And while we've reported back to council that that's the answer we've gotten from MMF, who administers the program for MDOT, we have good relationships with MDOT, so I asked if there were other avenues to have an exception provided. If that comes back, as that's the case, we'll probably have to delay the project, do some redesign if that's the action that council chooses to take. In fairness, staff has some concerns about sidewalks on one side of the street, but in trying to be responsive to the requests from the elected body who is responsive to concerns of the residents on the street, I went back and asked to see if there were any other ways to at least present that as an option.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. When we do hear back from MDOT, if there is a redesign, I don't know if we could do it, but I love the model that we did on Scioto Church, where we had multiple meetings, gave people options and that kind of thing. I know this is a different funding source and it's safe routes and all of those sort of hurdles, but any way that we can facilitate conversations and more input, I think on this section would help. I've had multiple personal conversations with people that I don't know from this road calling me based on somebody knowing them, it's a controversial one.
It's been a difficult process, and without being cavalier about this, when you seek money from other sources, you do have to follow the rules that they establish, as well as trying to be consistent with Complete Streets aspirations, Vision Zero aspirations, being respectful of property owners' concerns, as well as making sure that we protect mature trees that are a very strong characteristic of our urban forest. So, putting sidewalks in an existing mature neighborhood, an old neighborhood, is a difficult thing to do. And I know that staff has really pushed back in terms of the design process, which initially would have required removal of a lot more trees. So we hope, as I've hoped from the start, that there's a good answer, that we can find that's out there.
Cool, thank you.
Anything else? All right. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to the next item, which it's not clear what action you're asking for. I think it's just an informational item. And so we received it in our packet. Is there any future action that we want to take or questions at this time? This is the resolution regarding community engagement and approval process for city-related improvement projects.
This was approved last council meeting,
I think so. Or the one before.
so it's too late really to do much about it. I didn't like it at the time, and I still don't like it, but let's see if we can do anything about it.
Okay. We could say something at a later time, as far as a commission, if you wanted to bring it up. It's also possible to address it in a more generic form for any future types of items like this.
The resolution that council passed specifically addresses requiring council approval for lane reductions. And that's the item that
So,
this refers to.
in other words, council doesn't want engineers to do it, they want to do it themselves.
So we're not going to discuss the merits of the resolution right now, but definitely could do that in the future.
Oh, that's your call.
Yeah, I'd say Kathy?
Yeah, for some reason, there's been a lot of miscommunication regarding this and a lot of emotion. And the way it was explained to me, and so maybe we need to get all the facts out there, is this is just stating that we're going to follow a procedure that existed for many years and only recently wasn't followed. So, now I don't know if that's 100% true, so I think that before we have a discussion, we need to make sure that we do have all the facts.
So I'm going to encourage us to have a discussion based upon some actions or requests rather than just generally reacting to it. Is there a request to do that in the future, or just put aside some time next meeting to share feedback on this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
yes.
think it would be worth putting a spot on the agenda to have the ability for the commission to have the opportunity to provide feedback if we can all agree on feedback we want to send. So that would give commissioners time to prepare, what's the word I'm looking for?
A resolution,
A resolution
potentially?
that we could discuss and potentially pass.
Okay, and assemble some accurate information? Yes?
I just think we need to be careful and make sure that we're using the correct information before we move forward. And my preference would be to focus more on something that's actually going to significantly improve pedestrian safety, like looking at street lighting needs.
Okay.
I think that this is important for all kinds of safety, and I think it's worth our talking about in the future.
All right, so I will, under the category of future agenda items, Kayla and I will do that. And my preference will be that we have a resolution or something to react to and to take action on. So if anybody has any input on that within the next 2 or 3 weeks, let us know.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if you have ideas about what type of motion you think you might want to make. If you can submit those to me, then that will give Linda, Diane, and I something to look at when we do agenda setting.
Okay, thank you. The next item is a follow-up to outstanding commissioner questions, which seems like a report that's fairly complete in and of itself. So unless there are any clarifying questions on that. Thank you for that report and for the staff follow-up. And I'll move along to the Snow Buddy communication. This communication includes some specific requests for action items. And I don't remember if we did it in public here or just Kayla and I discussed the possibility of having somebody from Snow Buddy come and talk to us. And I think the beginning of summer is a great time to do that. So this may be a great way to start that process. So again, on the subject of future agenda items, we can set aside some time to respond to their request for action. Is that agreeable?
Yes.
I see lots of nodding. Okay. With that, then we would move into the liaison reports, and we do have an Ann Arbor Public Schools update, and unfortunately Liz is not here again to highlight that, but any questions or discussion about that report briefly? It's great to have it each month. Are there any other reports from people who serve as liaisons to organizations?
Yes, since our last meeting, I've attended meetings first with a subcommittee of the Energy Commission working for an ordinance to enhance electric vehicle infrastructure in Ann Arbor. Specifically what we want to do, and we're right now comparing language from different cities that have this, force new homes that are constructed or heavily revised, for instance, that were gutted in a fire, something like that, to have level 2 charging equipment available in their garages.
Great.
The other one is a county meeting, which is much less structured and ad hoc. It meets quarterly, and the big issue for this particular meeting is, it's outside the city of Ann Arbor, a proposed bridge over I-94 in downtown Ypsilanti. So that really wouldn't pertain to this committee.
But thanks for being a representative. Any other liaisons? Yes.
I have 2 dates to announce for public comment on the Washtenaw Avenue Bus Rapid Transit. The AATA is looking for people to come and give comments on the Reimagine Washtenaw future investments next week, Tuesday, April 23rd, from 4 to 7 at the Ypsilanti Transit Center, and Wednesday, April 24th, from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. at the Blake Transit Center. 3 of the specific items that will be discussed at these meetings are integrating express stop services along Washtenaw Avenue, signal prioritization for transit, and enhancing corridor stations. So there's been public sessions before, but ramping it up again and wanting more input.
Great. Thank you. Any other liaison reports? Yes.
Couple things going on at the university. You talked a lot about scooters here and city council passing the agreement with Spin. We had also passed an agreement with Spin, so we're pretty well coordinated with the city on the scooters, and I've been working closely with Raymond and his team and John Fournier. So it just really didn't make sense for each of us to be thinking about this differently because they cross between campus and the city quite a bit. So we'll be launching at about the exact same times. So that's happening. We continue to work on alternative transportation for parking for staff at the hospital. We've really enhanced some, in addition to what exists with the 4,000 staff a day that ride buses in from remote areas, we're doing even more with more frequent, smaller shuttles out to East Ann Arbor and things like that, trying to reduce the congestion and the need to bring your cars in closer to campus. Continue to work on those kind of things and hot topics. Lots of information, or lots of folks reaching out to me in my office about Fingerly and what we're doing with this, especially around football. A lot of people want to know, so we're working on that right now quite a bit. So.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, any communications from commission members?
Real quick.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I want to thank staff for the email responses that they sent out. Those were really comprehensive and showed a lot of care and time, and I appreciate it. Second thing is to remind everybody that May is Bike Month, and there's a lot of great things happening in the community, some through Get Downtown, some through local groups. So just Google Ann Arbor Bike Month, and you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff, including some calendars and that kind of thing. So hope to see you guys out.
And I'll mention on a personal note that my father was a city planner here in Ann Arbor, teaching city planning at the University of Michigan, and he was professor emeritus. And he passed away at the end of February 27th. And he's also a former chair, and I think he was either a 4- or 5-year member of the Planning Commission. And I just wanted to note his passing, and certainly I would not be involved at this level or have some of the secret planning knowledge that I have without growing up under his tutelage every evening around the dinner table especially. But that's something that has been quite a loss for our family. And his memorial service was this last weekend. So I'm hoping that it will be easier to focus and also have additional inspiration for me the next couple months as I process that loss for us. So I just wanted to mention that that's something that's important to me.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, Kathy.
I just want to thank staff for the work that they've started to do on getting pedestrian crash data. And we haven't even talked yet about how we might capture close calls. But I think that it's sort of changing the mindset as well as we collect this data, and it's really hard to compare it to what's happening in terms of national trends, because we know that pedestrian fatalities are up 35% over the last 10 years, and some of that's due to the greater use of SUVs. But anyway, it's something that we need to do. It's extremely complex, but I think it's going to help us improve pedestrian safety in the long run.
All right. Any other communications?
Yeah, I just want to mention that I was appointed to the RTA Citizens Advisory Committee, and yeah, I know we have an RTA board, I think, representative here, but I just wanted to let you know I'm serving on that, and they just started meeting. It's really just like about 4 times a year at this point. It's quarterly. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. The main thing I've heard that's going on is that DDOT and SMART are doing like a new unified, like new fare system where they can transfer between them without having to pay for a transfer, and you can get a day pass. And
All right. They're lucky to have you. The next item is agenda items for next time. We loaded up a whole bunch of them.
I'm wondering
Out
when
of
we're going to
turn.
get an update on the train station, because
I don't know if anything is scheduled. I think we're waiting for there to be a more substantial update.
I remember seeing that as like a future topic, I thought, like in the
Okay,
next,
well,
like.
we can check into that.
Yeah, we'll continue to keep you posted on that.
Any other future agenda items other than what we've gone into? Yeah, we did a lot, so.
Yeah, I can share what's on the work plan, and I think that Linda, Diane, and I will need to balance between what was on the work plan and all of the items that have been discussed tonight to see what we end up with. But just to give you a preview, what we had anticipated was a North Main Street stakeholder update about the MDOT project. I'm not sure if there's an update ready to give, but that's the placeholder that we have. Quiet zone update was requested and was scheduled actually to come in May. North University crosswalk project for U of M, so I'll check with Steve and we'll see if that's ready. And we were going to have our representative from RTA actually present to provide an update on their work. So I'll see if that's ready and if there's time in the agenda or if we push that out further.
Great. If there are no objections, I will call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.